Have you ever wondered if the little things you shrug off could be screaming warnings from your body? Picture this: a warm spring morning in a sleepy Ohio suburb, the kind where the air smells like fresh grass and the sun paints everything golden. That's where we meet Martha Grayson, a 70-year-old widow with a smile that could melt ice and hands that have spent decades coaxing life out of the earth. Martha's not just any grandma, she's the heartbeat of her family, the one who bakes blueberry pies for her grandkids and hums old hymns while pruning her beloved rose bushes. But on this particular morning, something's off. And it's not just the roses. Martha's out in her garden, her sanctuary. The flower beds are a riot of color: crimson reds, soft pinks, and buttery yellows, all framed by a rickety white fence she's too stubborn to replace. She's kneeling in the dirt, her straw hat tipped back, when she feels it, a heaviness in her chest, like someone stacked a pile of bricks on her ribs. Her arms ache, and her breath catches as she tugs at a stubborn weed. She pauses, wipes the sweat from her brow, and mutters to herself, "Oh, come on, Martha, you're just getting old." The grandkids are coming over later: little Tommy with his gap-toothed grin, and Emily with her endless questions, and she's determined to have the garden looking perfect. She shakes it off, chalking it up to too much coffee or not enough sleep. But deep down, something nags at her, a whisper she can't quite hear. Let me paint you a picture of Martha's world. Her house is a modest two-story with peeling blue paint, the kind of place that smells like cinnamon and memories. Inside, there's a faded photo of her and her late husband, Jim, grinning on their wedding day 48 years ago. Outside, the garden's her pride and joy. She's got a knack for roses her neighbors swear she could make them bloom in a snowstorm. Every Sunday, she's out there with her clippers, her knees stained with dirt, telling stories to the flowers like they're old friends. But today, as she leans over to snap off a wilted bloom, that heaviness hits again. Her hands tremble, and the clippers slip, nicking her finger. A tiny bead of blood wells up, and she stares at it, frowning. "What's wrong with me?" she whispers, half to herself, half to the roses. Now, Martha's no stranger to hard work. She raised 3 kids on a shoestring budget, kept the house running after Jim passed, and still finds time to knit scarves for the church bazaar. At 70, she's proud of her grit. But lately, she's been slowing down. The walk to the mailbox leaves her winded. Carrying the laundry basket upstairs feels like climbing a mountain. She's been brushing it off after all. Who doesn't get tired at her age? Her daughter, Lisa, keeps nagging her to see a doctor, but Martha just laughs. "Doctors are for sick people, honey," she says, waving a hand. "I'm fine." Famous last words, right? This morning, though, it's different. As she stands up from the flower bed, her legs wobble like they're made of jelly. She grabs the fence for support, her heart thudding a little too hard, a little too fast. The world tilts, just for a second, and she blinks it away. Overhead, a cardinal chirps, its red wings flashing against the sky, and she forces a smile. "Get it together, old girl," she tells herself. She's got pies to bake, grandkids to spoil. No time for this nonsense. But as she shuffles back toward the house, a shadow of doubt creeps in. What if this isn't just age? What if her body's trying to tell her something she's too stubborn to hear? Let's zoom in on that moment. Martha's standing there, one hand on the fence, the other clutching her gardening gloves. The sun's beating down, and a bead of sweat trickles past her ear. She can hear the faint hum of a lawnmower down the street, the bark of a dog, the everyday symphony of her quiet little world. But inside, it's not so quiet. Her chest feels tight, not painful. Exactly, just wrong. Her breaths are shallow, like she can't quite fill her lungs. She thinks back to last week, when she nearly dropped a bag of groceries in the driveway. Or the week before, when she sat down halfway through folding laundry because her arms felt like lead. Little moments she's ignored, buried under the excuse of "I'm not as young as I used to be." Here's the kicker: Martha's not alone. How many of us have felt that twinge, that flicker of exhaustion, and told ourselves it's nothing? How many times have you pushed through, thinking it's just life catching up? For Martha, it's second nature. She's the rock, the one who keeps going no matter what. But as she trudges up the porch steps, her sneakers scuffing against the worn wood, that whisper grows louder. She sinks into her rocking chair, the one Jim built years ago, and stares out at her roses. They're beautiful, thriving, a testament to her care. But what about her? Is she thriving or just surviving? The grandkids arrive an hour later, bursting through the door with sticky hands and loud voices. Tommy's got a toy truck he insists on showing her, and Emily's tugging at her sleeve, asking why roses have thorns. Martha forces a laugh, ruffles their hair, and heads to the kitchen to start the pie. But as she measures out the flour, her hands shake again. She spills a little on the counter, and for some reason, that tiny mess makes her eyes sting with tears. She wipes them away, blaming the onions she hasn't even chopped yet. "Pull yourself together," she mutters. The kids don't notice, they're too busy racing around the living room, but Martha does. She notices. By the time the pie's in the oven, she's sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. They're wrinkled, spotted with age, but strong. Hands that have planted gardens, held babies, wiped tears. Hands that, today, feel foreign. She thinks about Jim, how he'd tease her about being too stubborn for her own good. "You'd argue with a heart attack," he'd say, laughing. She smiles at the memory, but it fades fast. Because what if he was right? What if this isn't just tiredness, not just age creeping in? What if it's something bigger, something she can't outstubborn? As the smell of blueberries fills the house, Martha makes a decision. She's not ready to call Lisa yet, not ready to admit she might need help. But she's going to pay attention. She's going to listen to her body, just this once. She glances out the window at her roses, swaying gently in the breeze, and wonders, how many warnings do you get before it's too late? And here's the question I'll leave you with. Have you ever thought those little signs, the ones you laugh off, might be the key to saving your life? What would you do if the body you've trusted for decades started sending you signals you couldn't ignore? For Martha Grayson, that question is no longer just a what if. It's a Tuesday afternoon in her Ohio kitchen, the pie from yesterday long gone, crumbs scattered across the table where her grandkids sat giggling. The house is quiet now, too quiet, and Martha's perched on a stool, peeling carrots for a stew she's not even sure she'll eat. Her hands move slower than usual, and every so often, she stops to catch her breath. It's not the peeling that's wearing her out, it's something deeper, something she can't shake since that morning in the garden. Let's step into Martha's shoes for a minute. She's wearing her favorite apron, the one with little daisies stitched along the hem, a gift from her daughter Lisa years ago. The kitchen smells like simmering broth and the faint tang of roses drifting in through the open window. She's humming Amazing Grace, an old habit. When she feels it again, that tightness in her chest, like a fist squeezing her ribs. She sets the peeler down, presses a hand to her heart, and waits. It's not sharp, not like the dramatic heart attacks you see on TV. It's subtle, sneaky, a dull ache that comes and goes. Maybe it's the onions from last night, she tells herself, forcing a chuckle. But there's no fooling that little voice in her head, the one that's been whispering louder every day. Martha's not one to dwell. She picks up the peeler again, determined to finish the carrots. But as she reaches for the next one, her arm tingles, a strange, prickly sensation that runs from her elbow to her fingertips. She shakes it out, frowning, and keeps going. 2 carrots later, it happens again, this time with a wave of dizziness that makes the room spin. She grips the counter, her knuckles whitening, and mutters, "Come on, Martha, you're tougher than this." But tough doesn't stop the shortness of breath that creeps in when she climbs the stairs to grab a sweater. It's just one flight, 12 steps she's taken 1,000 times, but today, she's panting by the 10th, her legs heavy like they're slogging through mud. She doesn't tell anyone, not yet. What's she supposed to say? "Hey, Lisa, your old mom's falling apart?" No way. She's the one who holds it together, the one who's always fine. But the signs keep piling up, little cracks in the armor she's worn for years. Yesterday, she nearly dropped a basket of tomatoes from the garden, her hands just wouldn't cooperate. Last week, she woke up with her feet numb, pins and needles prickling as she shuffled to the bathroom. She blamed the cold floor, the creaky house, anything but the truth. Because admitting something's wrong means admitting she's not invincible, and Martha Grayson doesn't do vulnerable. That changes when her old friend Ellen stops by. Ellen's a retired nurse, sharp as a tack at 72, with a laugh that fills a room and eyes that miss nothing. She's dropping off a jar of homemade jam strawberry, Martha's favorite, when she catches Martha rubbing her chest mid-conversation. "You okay, hon?" Ellen asks, her brow furrowing. Martha waves it off. "Oh, just a little indigestion. Too much pie." But Ellen's not buying it. She sets the jam down, crosses her arms, and fixes Martha with a look that could pierce steel. "Martha Grayson, don't you lie to me. How long's this been going on?" Martha squirms, caught. She spills at the tiredness, the chest thing, the tingling arms. Ellen listens, nodding, her face growing serious. "You know what this sounds like, don't you?" she says, voice low. "Heart trouble. I saw it all the time at the hospital, folks your age, my age, ignoring the signs until it was too late." Martha's stomach drops. Heart trouble? Her? She thinks of Jim, how his heart gave out at 66, quick and quiet in his sleep. She always figured she'd dodged that bullet, that she was the strong one. "It's just age, Ellen," she protests, but her voice wavers. Ellen shakes her head. "Age doesn't make you gasp climbing stairs. Age doesn't numb your hands. You need to get this checked. Here's where I want to pause and bring you in. If you're watching this right now, let's make it real. Comment the number 2 down below and tell me, have you ever brushed off a sign like this? A little ache, a moment of weakness you blamed on something else? I'm curious, because Martha's story isn't just hers, it's ours too. Hit that comment button and let me know. I'll wait. Ellen's words stick with Martha like burrs on a sweater. She spends the rest of the day restless, pacing her little house, replaying every ache and twinge. By evening, she's back in the garden, watering her roses under a sky streaked with pink and orange. The hose trembles in her grip, and she feels that tightness again, sharper this time, radiating down her left arm. She drops the hose, water pooling in the dirt, and sinks onto a bench Jim built decades ago. The roses blur as her eyes fill with tears, not from pain, but from fear. What if she's right? She whispers to the flowers. What if I've been ignoring something I can't outrun? Martha's not a quitter, though. She wipes her face, squares her shoulders, and decides she's done pretending. She's not calling Lisa, yet her daughter would fuss and drag her to the ER tonight, but she's going to figure this out. She digs out an old notebook, the one she used to track her gardening, and starts jotting down what she's felt. The chest ache, the shortness of breath, the tingling, the dizziness. It's a short list, but it feels heavy, like stones in her pocket. She stares at it, her handwriting shaky, and wonders how she missed it. How did she let these whispers turn into shouts? The next morning, she's on her laptop, an ancient thing that whirs like a lawnmower, searching for answers. She types heart problems after 68 and scrolls through pages from the American Heart Association, her heart sinking with every word. Fatigue, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, numbness, dizziness. It's like they're describing her life these past weeks. One article says women over 65 often miss these signs, mistaking them for aging or stress. Another warns that heart disease kills more Americans over 65 than anything else. She slams the laptop shut, her breath hitching. "This can't be me," she says aloud, but the doubt's gone. It's not just possible, it's probable. Martha sits there, the morning light spilling across her kitchen table, and feels something she hasn't felt in years: helplessness. She thinks of her grandkids, their sticky hugs and endless energy. She thinks of her roses, still blooming despite her neglect. She thinks of Jim, how she promised him she'd take care of herself. And for the first time, she's scared not of dying, but of not living long enough to see Tommy lose that tooth or Emily graduate high school. She picks up the phone, her fingers hovering over Lisa's number, then sets it down. Not yet. She needs to know more, needs to be sure. As she stares out at her garden, the roses nodding in the breeze, a question burns in her chest. How many of these signs has she ignored? And how many more can she afford to miss? It's not just her story, it's a wake-up call. So tell me, what would you do if you were Martha? Would you wait, or would you fight? What happens when the warnings you've ignored finally catch up with you? For Martha Grayson, That moment comes on a Thursday afternoon, under a sky so blue it hurts to look at. She's in her garden again. Where else would she be? Surrounded by her roses, the one place she's always felt safe. The air's thick with the scent of blooms and freshly turned earth, and she's got her watering can in hand, a battered old thing she's had since Jim was alive. She's been restless all week, ever since Ellen's visit and that late-night spiral on the internet. The signs are there, written in her shaky notebook, staring her in the face. But today, she's pushing them aside, telling herself she's fine. She's Martha Grayson. After all, nothing knocks her down. Until it does. Let's set the scene. The roses are in full glory, their petals soft and heavy after a light rain. Martha's wearing her straw hat, tilted back so she can feel the sun on her face, and a pair of faded overalls streaked with dirt. She's humming again, Amazing Grace. Always Amazing Grace, as she tips the watering can over a cluster of crimson blooms. The grandkids are coming tomorrow, and she's got plans, a picnic in the backyard, maybe a batch of cookies if she's got the energy. She's mid-thought, picturing Tommy's grin, when it hits her like a freight train. The tightness in her chest is back, but this time it's not subtle. It's a claw, digging into her ribs, radiating down her left arm. She gasps, the watering can slipping from her fingers, water splashing across her boots. Martha stumbles, reaching for the bench, but her legs betray her. They're jelly again, weaker than ever, and the world tilts hard. She drops to her knees, the dirt cool against her palms, and tries to breathe. But the air won't come. It's stuck, shallow and useless, like she's sucking through a straw. Her hands tingle, numb at the tips, and a wave of dizziness crashes over her. The roses blur into a smear of red and green, and she thinks, not now, not here. But her body doesn't care what she thinks. She pitches forward, her cheek hitting the earth, and everything goes black. Next door, Mr. Henderson's out trimming his hedges. He's a gruff old man, 75 and counting, with a soft spot for Martha's pies. He hears the thud, soft, but unmistakable, and peers over the fence. There she is, sprawled among the roses, her hat tipped sideways, one arm flung out like she's reaching for something. "Martha!" he shouts, dropping his clippers. He's over the fence in seconds, no small feat for his bad knee, and at her side, shaking her shoulder. She's out cold, her face pale, her chest barely moving. He fumbles for his phone, dials 911, and barks. "Get here fast, she's not breathing right." The ambulance screams into the sleepy Ohio street minutes later, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the afternoon calm. Paramedics swarm the garden, their boots trampling the flower beds Martha's spent years perfecting. They hoist her onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask strapped to her face, and rush her to the hospital. Mr. Henderson stands there, helpless, watching the roses sway in the breeze as the ambulance peels away. He mutters a prayer, something he hasn't done in years, and wonders how it came to this. Martha wakes up to white walls and the beep of machines. Her head's foggy, her mouth dry, and there's a dull ache in her chest that won't quit. She blinks, disoriented, and sees Lisa at her bedside, eyes red from crying. "Mom, oh my God, you scared me," Lisa says, grabbing her hand. Martha tries to sit up, but a nurse young, with a no-nonsense ponytail, gently pushes her back. "Not yet, Mrs. Grayson. You've been through a lot." A doctor steps in, a gray-haired man with a clipboard and a voice that's calm but firm. "Martha, I'm Dr. Patel. You're lucky to be here. You nearly had a heart attack." The words land like a punch. "Nearly had a heart attack." Martha stares at him, her mind racing. "But I was just gardening," she croaks, her voice weak. Dr. Patel nods, pulling up a chair. "That's how it happens sometimes. Silent, sneaky, until it's not. We were in test. Your heart's been struggling for a while. You've got blockages, and your blood pressure's through the roof. If your neighbor hadn't found you," he trails off, letting the implication hang. Martha's eyes fill with tears, and Lisa squeezes her hand tighter. Dr. Patel flips through his clipboard, then looks at her with a mix of compassion and urgency. "Let me break it down for you, Martha. There were signs, 5 big ones you missed. 1. The fatigue, that bone-deep tiredness you couldn't shake. 2. The chest pain, even if it wasn't sharp. 3. The shortness of breath, climbing stairs or carrying groceries. 4. The numbness in your arms and legs, that tingling you ignored. 5. The dizziness, those moments the world spun. Sound familiar? Martha nods, stunned. It's her life, laid out in a list. Every little moment she brushed off now staring back at her. He leans forward, voice softening. These aren't just old age, Martha. They're red flags, especially after 68. The National Institute on Aging says folks your age, women especially, miss these all the time. Heart disease doesn't care if you're tough or stubborn. It creeps in quiet, then hits hard. You're here because you got lucky. Most don't. Lisa's crying now, and Martha feels the weight of it all, the years of pushing through, the excuses, the denial. She thinks of her roses, how she'd fallen among them, how close she'd come to never getting up. The room's quiet except for the machines, a steady beep that feels like a countdown. Martha stares at the ceiling, her mind replaying that moment in the garden, the claw in her chest, the dirt against her face, the roses blurring away. She'd always thought of herself as a fighter, someone who could outlast anything. But this wasn't a weed she could yank out or a storm she could wait out. This was her heart, the engine of her life, sputtering and failing. And she'd ignored it until it screamed. Dr. Patel stands, adjusting his glasses. We've stabilized you for now, but we're not done. We'll talk treatment soon, meds, maybe a stent. But Martha, this is your wake-up call. You've got to listen now. He leaves, and Lisa buries her face in her hands, sobbing. Martha reaches for her, weak but determined, and whispers, "I'm sorry, honey. I didn't know." But she did know, didn't she? She'd felt it, written it down, searched it online. She'd just hoped it would go away. As Lisa calls the family, Martha lies there, the hospital blanket scratchy against her skin. She sees it now, clear as day, the fatigue that wasn't just age, the pain that wasn't indigestion, the breathlessness that wasn't normal. 5 signs, 5 chances she'd missed. She thinks of Tommy and Emily, their picnic tomorrow that almost didn't happen. She thinks of her roses, waiting for her back home. And for the first time, she's not just scared, she's awake. Awake to how fragile it all is, how close she came to losing everything. So here's the question. How many warnings do you get before the fall? Martha got 5, and she nearly missed them all. What about you? Have you felt that twinge, that whisper, and told yourself it's nothing? Because let me tell you, Martha's story says it's not nothing. It's everything. What do you do when you've stared death in the face and walked away? For Martha Grayson, that question isn't hypothetical anymore, it's her new reality. She's back home now, a week after that terrifying fall among the roses, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch. The hospital's behind her, the beeping machines a fading memory, but the lessons? Those are carved into her bones. She's not the same Martha who knelt in the dirt that day, oblivious and stubborn. She's a survivor, a woman reborn, and she's got a story to tell, one that might just save your life too. Let's rewind a bit. Martha leaves the hospital with a stack of papers and a stern warning from Dr. Patel. This isn't over, Martha. You've got work to do. Her heart's a ticking clock, clogged with years of neglect, but it's not too late. Lisa drives her home, the car silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle. Martha stares out the window at the Ohio fields rolling by, green and endless, and makes a promise to herself. No more excuses. No more brushing it off. She's got grandkids to chase, roses to tend, a life to live. And she's not letting her heart steal that from her. The first days are rough. She's weak, her chest still tender from the scare, and the meds make her dizzy. Beta blockers, a statin, something for blood pressure she can't pronounce. Lisa hovers, fussing over every step, and Martha snaps at her once. "I'm not an invalid." But she softens fast, seeing the fear in her daughter's eyes. They sit down together that night, the kitchen glowing warm under the old chandelier, and Lisa says, "Mom, I can't lose you too." Martha nods, tears spilling over, and they hug like they haven't in years. It's a turning point not just for her heart, but for her soul. Dr. Patel's words echo, "Change your life, or it'll change you." So Martha starts small. She trades her greasy bacon breakfast for oatmeal with a handful of blueberries fresh from the farmer's market, not the pie this time. She learns potassium matters, so she adds bananas to her mornings. They're sweet but a new ritual. The American Heart Association says it helps her heart pump strong, and she's not arguing with science anymore. She ditches the fried chicken for baked salmon, swaps salt for herbs from her garden rosemary, thyme, little sprigs she snips with shaky hands. It's not easy, Lord knows she misses her buttery biscuits, but every bite feels like a fight she's winning. Then there's the moving. Martha's never been a gym type, give her a shovel over a treadmill any day, but Dr. Patel says her heart needs exercise, gentle and steady. So she walks. Every morning, she laces up her sneakers, worn but trusty, and circles the backyard, past the roses that saw her fall. At first, it's 10 minutes, her breath short, her legs wobbly. But she keeps at it, counting the steps, feeling the sun on her face. A week in, it's 15 minutes. Then 20. She starts waving at Mr. Henderson, who's taken to watching from his porch, a quiet guardian since that day. Looking good, Martha. He calls, and she grins, her chest lighter not just from the walk, but from hope. The garden calls her back too. She's slower now, no more hauling heavy bags of soil, but she's out there every day, pruning, watering, whispering to her roses like old friends. The crimson blooms are still her favorite, though they'll always carry that memory, the dirt against her cheek, the world fading. She doesn't shy away from it. It's a reminder, a scar she wears with pride. One afternoon, she finds a new bud, tiny and perfect, pushing through the earth. She smiles, tears pricking her eyes, and thinks, that's me, still growing. Lisa helps her set up checkups every 3 months, no skipping. The first one's a revelation. Her blood pressure's down, her cholesterol's inching toward normal. Dr. Patel claps her on the shoulder, a rare smile breaking through. You're doing it, Martha. Keep this up, and you'll see those grandkids grow up. It's the push she needs. She starts a journal, not the old gardening one, but a new one, leather-bound, a gift from Ellen. She tracks her walks, her meals, her meds, and sometimes her thoughts. Felt strong today, she writes one night. Felt alive. The grandkids come over, and it's different now. Tommy barrels into her arms, and she hugs him tight, no wincing from chest pain. Emily tugs her outside, pointing at the roses. Why do they keep blooming, Grandma? She asks, her eyes wide. Martha kneels carefully, mind you, and says, because they've got fight in them, sweetie. Just like me. Later, they sit on the porch, the kids munching cookies, less sugar this time, but they don't complain. Martha tells them her story, the fall, the hospital, the comeback. Tommy's jaw drops, and Emily gasps, you're a superhero. Martha laughs, the sound full and free. Not quite honey, just someone who learned to listen. That night, she's alone again, the house quiet, the stars peeking through the window. She thinks back to those 5 signs: fatigue, chest pain, shortness of breath, numbness, dizziness. They're not just a list anymore, they're her battle scars, proof she dodged a bullet. She thinks of Jim, how he'd be proud, how she's keeping her promise. She thinks of Ellen, whose sharp words woke her up, and Mr. Henderson, whose quick call saved her. She's not alone in this, never was, and that's a comfort she clings to. Martha's not perfect. She still craves a slice of pie some days, still pushes herself too hard in the garden. But she's alive, really alive, and that's what matters. She's got a new routine. Oatmeal at dawn, walks at sunrise, roses at noon. She's got a new mantra, whispered to herself when the doubt creeps in. Don't wait till you fall. And she's got a new mission to tell her story, to make sure no one else misses what she did. So here she is, a week later, standing in her garden. The roses are thriving, their colors brighter than ever, and Martha's right there with them. She picks up her watering can lighter now. She's learned her limits and tips it over the blooms. The water sparkles in the light, and she feels her heart beat steady, strong, alive. She's not just surviving anymore, she's blooming. And as she looks out at her little world, she wonders, how many others are out there, ignoring the whispers, waiting for the shout? Let's bring it home. Martha's back, better than ever, because she acted, because she listened. Dr. Patel's advice wasn't just for her, it's for you too. Don't wait till you're on the ground, he'd said. Check your heart, change your life, now. So what's your move? Will you shrug off that twinge, that tiredness, like Martha did for too long? Or will you take a page from her book, start small, walk a little, eat a little better, call that doctor? Because here's the truth, your heart's talking. Are you listening? And one last thing, what will you do today to save your own heart? Martha's waiting for your answer, out there among the roses, rooting for you. I am too.